good afternoon, good evening. Welcome all. Thank you for joining the seminar CIMMYT and the Future of Food Systems, Excellence in Science Thought Leader Seminars. Today, I am pleased to welcome our special speaker on behalf of Dr. Brian Goberts, Director General of the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, CIMMYT. Our special invitee of today, Lei Win, will present the seminar Climate and Food. She is a climate and food correspondent, and she will present the seminar CIMMYT and the Future of Food Systems. Lei Win is an award-winning Rome-based multimedia journalist specializing in food and climate issues for various international news media, including through her own newsletter, Thin Ink. Her extensive global experience includes nearly 13 years working as an international correspondent for the Thomson Reuters Foundation, the nonprofit arm of the Thomson Reuters media company, covering topics ranging from climate change and resilience to food insecurity and refugees and displacement. She is also a sought-after speaker on Myanmar and moderator on food, agriculture, and climate change. She is born and raised in Myanmar. Thing was lived and worked in Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand, and most recently Italy, and has reported from many parts of Asia, Africa, and Europe. In 2015, Thin returned to Myanmar after many years abroad to set up, launch, and manage Myanmar Now, an award-winning bilingual news agency, producing in-depth reports on the country's history elections. Thin also co-founded the Kite Tales, a unique preservation project that chronicles the lives and histories of ordinary people across Myanmar. Lei Win, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Isabel. Can you hear me and see me fine?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Great. I'll try my best to stay on the video. I apologize in advance for any technical glitches. If they are my fault, not of Isabel or CIMMYT, because I am currently in the midst of moving in between cities. And one of the few things that seem to have been very efficiently done, the only thing was that the internet company cut my internet today 5 days earlier than they should have. So I am at the moment rushing to trying to call us in using a hotspot. So I apologize if there are glitches. We do have a backup plan. But again, like Isabel said, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm very honored to be speaking here today because, CIMMYT, because of my role focusing on food security and climate issues, what CIMMYT has been doing, which is to ensure food security in many parts of the world. You've helped millions of people over the 7 decades that you've been in existence. You've won many awards for your work. And in fact, the Green Revolution is a legacy of CIMMYT, right? So I feel extremely honored to be here today. But I also feel the need to come clean right from the get-go and say that I am not a scientist. I know next to nothing about plant breeding. So I'm not going to be talking about science because you are the expert. But what I am is a journalist, and I've been working as a journalist focusing on humanitarian issues where food security was part of it for nearly 15 years. And for the past 5, I have really focused my reporting on food systems and climate change. So I've seen the shifts in understanding around food, hunger, malnutrition, and the debates around these issues. And I've also seen how narratives are formed and are being formed. So my hope at the end of this 1 hour is that you leave with some food for thought on the role of CIMMYT or CIMMYT's wider role in this current context. What is the current context? Well, the current context is that we have a world where not only are there hunger, which is what CIMMYT's role when you were just starting out, when you were, I guess, in your infancy, right? But we also need to improve the livelihoods of smallholder farmers urgently, which is what CIMMYT is doing right now. But in addition to those two, we now have this new normal that include pandemics, extreme weather events, and very volatile global commodity markets. So what does CIMMYT want to be in this new area? Where do you fit in? And I'm really keen to hear your thoughts after my short presentation, where you are and what your thinking is as well. This is a topic that I'm extremely passionate about. I think it's a fascinating and very, very important issue for journalists to cover. And in fact, it was one of your colleagues, Andy Jarvis from CIMMYT, who really made me realize the importance of this topic. It was about 5 years ago that I was interviewing him, and he compared the relationship between agriculture and climate change to an unhappy marriage. He said this is because they're so intricately linked to each other, and yet so much. And when I first heard that, but my background and experience have really informed my reportage as well. I happen to be a massive foodie. I definitely live to eat, and I, plan most of my days around meals. And like Isabel said in the introduction, I was also born and raised in Burma, Myanmar, which is a poor agrarian country in Southeast Asia. And that really made me realize from a very young age the importance of agriculture. And it is also a country where smallholder farming is really the backbone of food security. It is also where I met my first love, which is rice. Because in Myanmar, when we meet each other, we don't actually say, hello, how are you? We actually ask each other, have you had rice? We even refer to our meal times as rice eating time. And now I live in Italy, Rome, where I'm sure you know that wheat is king. So pasta is my second love. Here too, people are extremely obsessed with food, but the debates around hunger, food systems, malnutrition are very, very different from the one that I was reporting on in Southeast Asia. And so my, upbringing in Myanmar, my 2 decades living abroad and eating abroad, and this international journalism career has helped me to understand the nuances of these debates that are happening around food systems transformation. And I hope it has also helped me with a slightly different perspective, which hopefully you'll find interesting as well. I'm going to share my screen now. It would be great if you could let me know if it is working.
Yes, it is working.
Perfect. Okay, so I am sure that many of you already know all the debates around food systems. So I don't want to, what shall I say? Spend too long a time on it, because we all know that the way we are currently producing, processing, transporting, consuming, and then discarding food is just completely unsustainable. It is really inequitable and also very, very unhealthy, right? Why am I saying it's unsustainable? Because food systems account for nearly 1/3 of total man-made emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and agriculture is a primary driver of biodiversity loss, right? Food production and yields have increased steadily since the 60s. And this was, I guess, pretty soon after CIMMYT was officially established. And yet we're seeing rising hunger and malnutrition levels. So according to the latest SOFI report, right, which came out last week, 1 in 10 people went to bed hungry in 2021. The prevalence of undernourishment actually has increased from 9.3% in 2020 to 9.8% in 2021. Nearly 1 in 3 women of reproductive age are anemic. Remember, these numbers are from 2021, so they actually do not include the impacts from the war in Ukraine or the recent food price hikes. The issue, of course, as we know, is not just about availability, but also about affordability and access. So the report also said that 3.1 billion people, 2 out of 5, could not afford a healthy diet in 2020. we expect this number to have increased significantly. The report also said that by 2020, we might have the same number of hungry people as we did in 2015. That was the year that world leaders met and agreed on a set of goals known as the SDG. And now we're going back 15 years, things haven't really improved in some ways. And I'm sure that we're going to see increases there as well. Now, it seems that COVID, actually before that, what we're also seeing is that we're seeing more overweight children globally. We're seeing rising trends in around half of the country worldwide, the report has said. And guess what? The latest numbers we have on adult obesity, which were from 2000 to 2016, show that obesity had doubled between those years. So we're going to have updated global estimates before the end of this year, and I think we're going to see yet another increase there too. And it seems like COVID-19 may have worsened all of these trends, because there were two small studies in Chad and Peru that showed that both childhood wasting and obesity has increased during COVID. So what do we do? Now, according to the experts, we need to tackle this in a holistic manner using the food systems approach. What is the food systems approach? Well, this is a diagram from a paper by the Global Food Security Programme, which was set up by the UK government. What it says is that a food systems approach considers the activities, outcomes, and actors involved in agriculture, storage, processing, and manufacture, distribution, retail, and consumption, and alongside the various pressures and drivers. As you can see, it's not just about production. There are lots of factors, as you can see in this diagram, that makes up the food systems. And experts say that it is important to frame this issue in this way because the food system is highly interconnected, and this approach avoids unintended consequences from intervention in one part of the system to be adversely affecting another. And experts says that this is how we should deal with multiple and overlapping issues of hunger, malnutrition, environmental destruction, and climate change. Now, the most recent events, right, the 2.5 year and counting of COVID-19, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, wildfires that we've seen in many parts of the developed world last year, and the devastating drought currently in the Horn of Africa. I think all of that has underlined not only how broken our food systems are, but also how vulnerable they are to external shocks. So everybody agrees that food systems need to change, and everybody is saying how we need to have a food systems transformation. But it seems nobody can agree on how it is going to change and what it is going to. So I want to talk about CIMMYT in the context of this food system transformation. They could affect your role and your work on 3 different levels. First, around the debate on food systems transformation in general. Second, the debate around dietary shifts. And third, debate around production shifts. And there's a 4th factor, not necessarily a level, but a factor, which is an unknown factor of an increasingly unpredictable future. In a way, this number 4 is not exactly new because CIMMYT has been working on climate smart agriculture for years now, right? But I think we're definitely seeing in a very tangible way how climate change is playing out and affecting food production more and more. And things are only going to get worse before they get better. I guess there is a bit of a 3.5, if we want to, which is the debate around, the restructuring of CGIAR, to which CIMMYT belongs. And the direction the changes will happen will also play a role in what you can do and your impact and your role around food systems transformation. But I won't go into it in details, but I think it's worth, I guess, keeping in mind that that is another factor. Even though the impact may be smaller compared to dietary and production shifts, it will affect you directly. So let's start with the debates on food systems transformation in general. Like I said, everybody agrees on the need for change, but there's heated debate on so many different aspects of this change. And essentially, that's because the whole discussion is around what would future food systems look like? Will they be characterized by self-sufficiency and local production, or improved trade across borders? Should our plates have less meat and more vegetables? Or are we going to rely on cell-based proteins and precision fermentation? Are we going to be sparing big chunks of land and then concentrate production on small plots? Or are we going to ask our farmers to share their land with animals and forests and be interdependent on each other? Should we be focusing on producing as much food as we can through large-scale industrial farming? Or is it better to support smaller scale producers? How about traditionally bred hybrids that can withstand changes in climate versus indigenous strains and crops and wild crops that may have adapted to the landscapes? Which is a better answer to the climate change? Do we let markets decide, or do we support food production with subsidies? So many topics and so many disagreements. The bones of contention are multifold, but to me, looking from the outside, having reported on this for many years, the biggest debate and tensions center on two major visions of future food systems. That's between those who believe that food production needs to be intensified to feed a growing population, but to do it sustainably through technological innovation, and those who prefer smaller scale, eco-friendly production with a broader overhaul of the policies and economic influences on the food chain. Now, the question, of course, is will the famines of tomorrow will be better prevented by intensive production driven by technology, or by food sovereignty and bottom-up practices that level the playing field? And I'm sure that you have seen these debates, very heated, played out last year over the Food Systems Summit. So where does CIMMYT fit in? Where should you fit in? Also, should you even fit in? Should you try and stay above all of the debates? That's absolutely possible, but I think it's also important to note that if you don't participate, then others may create your narrative for you. And these narratives and debates around food system transformation are not going to go away. In fact, they're going to get even bigger and more disputed, because both consumers and policymakers in the developed world are finally taking real notice about food systems. Why? Because of what's happening in Ukraine. But what if science alone is not enough? And we've seen that with both the climate crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic, right? The science is established, particularly in the case of climate change, and yet there's still not enough to change the situation. So if the science alone is not enough, because CIMMYT, after all, is a science and research institution, if science alone is not enough, then what is CIMMYT's role and responsibility to influence policy and social systems? Let's go to point 2, debate on dietary shifts. Now, again, one of the things, that the Ukraine situation has shown us is how important wheat is. And you are the world's preeminent research institution on this crop. So where do you think you fit in this? However, many experts are also talking about how substitution is perhaps already happening in some places where they can't get access to wheat because of fears of shortages, and how that may be changing people's diets. And I recently caught up with an agriculture economist just a couple of days ago who said that some countries are consuming too much wheat and they should reduce their consumption levels because these consumption patterns have made them reliant on a single exporter like Russia or Ukraine. And now they're extremely vulnerable to these shocks. So we now know how important wheat is, but now there are questions and debates about whether is it really ideal for us to eat this much grain. Now, this graphic that you see on the left is from the Foresight 2.0 report from the Global Panel on Food Systems and Agriculture for Nutrition. And it shows that what the world eats predominantly is grain. The report also said that malnutrition in all its forms has become one of the most serious threats to global health. And it blames it on unhealthy diets. It said that countries are dealing simultaneously with both overweight and anemia. And I think some of the latest data from SOFI 2022 bore this out. Again, this is not about people eating grains as much as how much grains people are eating, right? People are getting calories, but not nutrients. Of course, you can come up with a wheat or a maize variety that has vitamin A or iron, but then there's already food available that has these nutrients. And ideally, people should be eating those. Now, nutritionists are also pointing out the differences between, how whole unrefined wheat is a major source of starch and energy, as well as protein and nutrients, but the bread, the pasta, the noodles, the snack that we are now eating every day don't have those properties because they're highly processed. So there's a real push to make healthy foods affordable, but also for people to have healthier, more diversified diets. So again, this debate, where can CIMMYT fit in this trajectory of changing diets? Because the focus on productivity and yield in the past decades have led to a calorie security, but not necessarily nutrition security. So what can CIMMYT do about this? Can you bring your decades of insight and research and knowledge to be part of this debate on dietary shifts? Now, the third big debate around food system transformation is on production shifts, right? This is another illustration from the Foresight 2.0 report that compares what we're currently producing versus what we should be eating. The underlying data is a little bit old, but I haven't seen any new production data that is that are dramatically different from these. So I think these still hold. And research has also shown that some of the largest land area expansion in the past decade has been for starchy grains like wheat and maize, and oil crops like soybean, sunflower, and palm oil. And these are obviously using for food and livestock. And the commodities, the most abundant commodities on a per capita basis in countries as well has been major cereals, the three main cereals, rice, wheat, and maize. So some experts are saying that this global expansion of land area for farming, this production, this destruction of perhaps some environment for conversion to farmland was largely for commodities that are associated with diets that are rich in calorie, but relatively poor in micronutrients. Now, this is an opinion piece that was first published in Bloomberg and later on Washington Post quite recently. And this is part of that debate on shifting production from too much staples into more diversified foods. As you can see from the table on the right, it's showing that we're relying, much of our calories on three staples, right, wheat, and maize. In terms of resilience, this is not good, because if something happens to, just one of these crops, we're in trouble, as we are seeing right now. Another reason why we're having this debate around production shifts is because of the environmental impacts of producing some food over others. This graph, again, is from the Foresight 2.0 report, and it shows the impact on the environment from different types of food. Grains are low when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, and this is what a lot of the climate action have focused on in the past. But they're high, yeah, in other things: cropland use, blue water use, nitrogen and phosphates, applications. And I'm realizing that these are grains. They're not just talking about wheat, but wheat and maize play a big role in here. So, both the media and the campaigners are already starting to talk about impacts beyond just carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas emissions. And they're going to start looking at how can we shift production in a way where we can still produce food, but perhaps don't have such an impact on the environment. One other aspect or final aspect that I want to touch on about this debate is that agricultural subsidies, right? Research have shown that worldwide support for food and agriculture sector around from 2013 to 2018, so about 5 years, amounted to about 630 billion per year. And they're talking about repurposing or rebalancing these subsidies from, and I quote, energy-rich to nutrient-rich crops. This is probably going to take quite a while, but the discussions are real and they're taking place. If that happens, what's CIMMYT's strategy? What are you going to do? The fourth point, we are facing a future where we need to manage multiple risks simultaneously. A little bit over 2 years ago, soon after COVID-19 reached Italy, you may remember that Italy was the first European country to be hit the hardest from the pandemic, or at least hit first and really hard. There was also a short spell of really terrible weather in the country's north. So I spoke to farmers who at first were really struggling with the lack of labor, and springtime was coming because of lockdowns and labor cannot move. Well, they were now facing crop failure because of changes in the climate, a sudden change in temperature. So I interviewed a strategic risk expert who told me that we should no longer be surprised. We should start getting used to this, because she said, this is the new normal. We are in a world of converging risks. And she also said that we should assume, as part of all of our planning and strategy, that you're not going to see threats manifest in isolation of one another anymore. Right? I would argue that climate change and biodiversity loss are two of the biggest long-term risks we're facing. And we're facing them simultaneously at the same time. And the risks for both food production and our own existence are great. And they will affect not only just the quantity, but also the quality of food. Right? So again, I guess, where does CIMMYT fit in? What's CIMMYT vision for this future? And in the near future, it is also likely that we're going to continue to see conflicts. The Ukraine situation has shown that food security community perhaps have not been paying close attention to larger questions around risk and risk management from the fallout of such situations. And for now, the focus is on humanitarian aid, which is right and is much needed. But I'm also really worried that a lot of the responses have been short-term in nature, short-sighted, and they don't seem to be taking into consideration longer-term impacts of these responses and about how to build resilience. So given all of these debates around food system transformation, including shifts in diets and production, what is CIMMYT's vision for this future? What's your strategy for this future? And this is my last slide. I want to end with a few big questions for CIMMYT and for you to ponder. When previous assumptions no longer hold true, and things seem to be heading in the wrong direction, what should scientific institutions like CIMMYT do? When I say previous assumptions, for example, let's just take grain reserves, right? In the 1990s, many countries either significantly reduced or abandoned grain reserve programs, because there were a few reasons, including the fact that having these kind of reserves are costly, but they were also against the prevalent economic thinking of that time, right? Which was all about small government and encouraging open markets and trade. That worked fine when the future was predictable and we knew that, staples are going to be, production is going to be this amount for this much for this future. But this is no longer the case, right? We are increasingly facing a future where there might be multiple bread basket failures. Then what? What should scientific institutions like CIMMYT do? Is it enough just to provide science to weather the worsening droughts and floods? Is it enough just to provide better seeds from your labs and look for the latest scientific breakthrough? Can you influence policy? Should you? If you can, how do you influence policy? Because science, no matter how solid, doesn't become policy on its own. Again, we've seen that with both climate change and COVID. You have had decades of insight. How can they be part of the bigger food systems transformation debate? Are you just looking at wheat and maize and not beyond, how they're perceived, where the future direction is? A lot of talk about diversification being key to resilience, and that means diversification of crops, of diets, of markets, of products. Have you thought of where CIMMYT will fit in such a scenario? How about biodiversity, things like neglected crops? Is CIMMYT, where does CIMMYT fit in with the COP15 discussions? The Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD discussions about protecting land and water. Should CIMMYT have a role? Could it have a role? Many farming organizations and groups are also now pushing for food system transformation debate to include things like justice, equity, food sovereignty, rights, and accountability. They want to have a frank discussion about power, who has it, and how it should be distributed more equally. Again, what is CIMMYT's role there? Should it have a role? Could it have a role? And last but not least, I'm taking full advantage of my role as an outsider to be provocative here. Right? The Green Revolution has been CIMMYT's legacy, and it is an important legacy. But there are also many who are questioning, sometimes increasingly, some of its unintended consequences around industrial farming. There are debates around how Africa was left behind from that revolution. So as we move forward in the short, medium, and long term, what is the big picture for CIMMYT? What does CIMMYT want to be in this new era and this new future? Now that you've grown up, now that you are the grand dame in terms of age, over 7 decades, where do you now move forward? And how do you become part of all of this debate around food systems? That's it from me. Thank you very much for your time. I hope I haven't bored you. I'd be very interested in taking any questions or any comments, or just debate. If you disagree with me, I'd be really interested in hearing.
Thank you so much for this enlightening presentation. Thank you very much. Very interesting, very stimulating. Now I would like to invite Dr. Bram Goberts, CIMMYT Director General, to give a few words. Dr. Bram. Okay, he might be. Okay, so maybe we can start with the conversation, with these debate questions that you just presented to us. So anyone that would like to make any comment, you can raise your hand or you can write your comment. Okay, Gideon, yes, please go ahead.
Right. Hello, hi, I'm Gideon Cruzman. I lead the foresight research at CIMMYT. So a lot of the things that you mentioned are definitely not new. But it's also an issue which we try to point out that some of these issues that you raise in terms of the debate around the role of staples in food systems contain really misleading information. So if you say, okay, the cereals are low in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions, but look how they show up in terms of land use. It's really high. Yes, because there is a lot of it being produced, but they also produce a lot of calories, and the energy that the people that people need to live, and it's not just calories; it's also proteins. The wheat provides a large portion of the proteins for many very poor people, and so this focus on saying, oh well, maybe we should move away from wheat can be extremely misleading, because it's when you look at the overall food system, it's not just about healthy diets, right? It's really that, but while it's extremely important, it's also about affordability. So the kind of healthy diets that are forward, the one that you showed in your presentation, but also the one from the Lancet report from 2019, those diets cost more, twice as much as the total income of the poorest 50% of the world's population. So those are real issues, and the danger is in terms of this. If I say it provocatively, you're being very provocative, so let me be a little bit provocative as well. Cereal bashing has the danger of throwing away the baby with the bathwater. And definitely, I completely agree. Having more diversified diets is a really good thing. But right now, it's only affordable for the affluent. So let me just leave it at that, because there's this. Similarly, there is in your presentation, there are a number of these issues where you say, ooh, you have to be careful, because it can be really misinterpreted in terms of what this means, and that it could, if this type of discussion actually hurts the people that we're trying to support. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Isabel, do we wait for more comments, or do you want me to respond, or I've just switched off my video just because of the bandwidth issue?
Yes, you can go ahead with the comment with this one, and then we can give the microphone to Leonard.
Sure, great. No, thanks, Gideon. And I'm absolutely aware that I'm being extremely provocative here, but I think I don't disagree with you that some of those discussions can be misleading. That's also the same issue, right, when we talk about livestock, because the discussions around livestock can be very misleading too, and lack nuances. There's a lot of talk about needing to cut meat. Yes, but consumption levels of meat are not the same throughout the world. In places like Myanmar, where I come from, right, the anemia levels are so bad for women of reproductive age, and there's so much micronutrient deficiency that there needs to be more consumption of meat. But then the even experts that I have spoken to also realize that the government policies have always favored rice above everything else, so there needs to be a bit of a balancing. And I think it helps, to me at least, to know that these are the discussions that are taking place, so that you are able to defend it. Because I do think that that there's a lot of talk around subsidies, reforming, right? There's a lot of talk around trying to make sure that legumes and fruits and vegetables become so much more affordable, so that diversified diets can be accessible. Because I think at this point in time, what we have is not an availability issue, it's an affordability and access issue, right? So, all of these definitely needs to be sorted. But I think in many ways, cereals, unfortunately, are facing the kind of headwinds that livestock and meat is facing. And you're going to have to be prepared for that, I think. I'm not against cereals. I'm not against you. I love carbs. But this is what I see happening. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Learner, yes, please, you can open your micro and your video.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm driving, so I hope my sound is okay. But yeah, so my name is Leonard Woltering. I work on scaling, and I just want to go back to your remark about the marriage, right? So I think you have a really nice presentation. It's such an important topic. You also talk a lot about the role of farmers and the role of, let's say, CIMMYT and let's say donors. But just like in the marriage, there's a give and take, right? And there is the ones that have to give are the ones that are benefiting from the current, let's say, bad food system, right? There are people benefiting from that, making a lot of money, for example. So I'd really like to hear from you your take on the issue of power, maybe the role of big food in that as well, and how they play part of that whole food system transformation. Because I'm afraid that if we are only the ones that are kind of constructing things and making things better, it will just be incremental change in a fundamentally bad system, right? So I think if we really want to talk about transformation, I think we really have to talk also about letting go, right?
No, absolutely. I completely agree with you. That's why, when you talk about it, we're no longer just talking about, we need to improve production or yield, or we need to improve diets. Now, I think the whole topic, the discussion is, or at least terminology, is food systems transformation, right? Because the current system is just not working. And to really transform it, you actually definitely need to have every player involved. CIMMYT, like you said, and like I've said, have played a really important role. But yeah, the power imbalance in the food system is real. And over the past, I think, 3 or 4 decades, the consolidation, corporatization, financialization, and commodification of food systems and agriculture has reached a system where, now, you've heard about big oil and big tobacco. Now you have the term big ag, right? In fact, it's big food, because it's not just agriculture. A few, the private sector and some of the big companies that play an outsized role when it comes to everything, right? From farm equipment to seeds to fertilizers. There are a lot of grassroots groups that are trying to talk about this, discuss this, talking about, this power imbalance. There are journalists who are trying to, bring it out in the open, all these discussions. I work part-time with an outfit called Lighthouse Reports, which is a group of investigative journalists. And we're trying to essentially look at some of these issues around power and consolidation, and it's not a pretty picture. I mean, one of the things that we've found is that in the aftermath of the Ukraine crisis, in Europe, there's this massive push to roll back a lot of ambitions, green ambitions, essentially. with pointing out that, oh, otherwise we will go hungry. But Europe doesn't have the food security issue, not nowhere near in the same manner as developing region, or the countries who are import dependent and will be really suffering from what's happening in Ukraine, right? But there are big interests at play, and I think the jury is still out as to whether they will actually change their behavior. Again, just speaking from a Europe point of view, when the farm to fork strategy was passed, there was hope that we've turned a corner, but we've seen that with the latest conflict, people are saying, oh no, we can't have that anymore. We have also seen some significant gains actually in South America when it comes to trying to tackle some of these issues around power imbalance, marketing and advertising, right? But to me, it still feels like David and Goliath situation. I'm sorry if the answer is a little bit depressing, but I also sometimes feel like is there anything we can do better? There is definitely a lot more. I think one silver lining, I think I would say, is that there's definitely a lot more interest and awareness from ordinary consumers around these things happening. So I think we just need to take advantage of that.
Thank you, Lynn. We have a comment over here. I'm just going to read it, and then I'm going to give the microphone to Eva from Ridaura. It says, it is not about cereal or no cereals, but it is about the way we grow, transform, commercialize, subsidize, and so forth cereals. The question is how we can do it better. Looking at hunger, nutrition poverty, and environmental degradation fears, it seems we can do it much better. Thanks a lot for this very interesting presentation. So now I'm going to give the micro to Eva, please.
Yes, thank you, Isabel. Should I or shouldn't? I think I shouldn't, right? Because of the...
No, you can. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much, Finn. It was very, very interesting what you presented to us. And I had two questions which are a bit interrelated. So you were speaking about the international approach, but did you see that is there a role like regionally of priorities that maybe could be started to be solved in Africa, Asia, and Latin America? And also related to this question, even though there are two main approaches, like for a more farming intensive and a more small farmer approach, is there common ground between them? Are there some places where we could both build together?
Great, thanks, Eva. I think definitely there is a massive role for regional, or I would even say quite local work. And I'm saying this because looking at just from, for example, the C40 Cities Initiative, right? I think climate change has given quite a lot of good examples of how small, starting at a city scale, right, or local community scale, you can grow. And I think that's a great a model that we can follow, because in some ways, mayors and governors and local politicians, right, can have quite a lot of sway and work and can work faster than national level and international work. So I think definitely you should take advantage of it. Start, locally and then regionally. And like, I think in some ways, the smaller use, well, you still need to have a critical mass, right? So that it's replicable and scalable. But if you can start it from that, I think then, and then you can find partners, you can find people who, can work with you, and that's how I think the ball can roll. So, I would definitely say, the mayor's pledge and all the C40 city work, I think would be a good model for food if we're looking at, smaller scale, starting from smaller scale. In terms of common ground between the two, well, I guess the common ground is that they all both agree that things need to change, right? So we're starting from that. I think so. I'd like to think I am pragmatic. I think everything needs to be on the table. I think nothing should be off the table unless it is, you know, the disadvantages, then the harm so far outweighs the benefits. Because I think we're at this point in time when we can't just say, oh, we only do this and not this. You know, this is the only way. I think we just needs to be all hands on deck. But of course, you know, you've got interest groups on both sides, right? And you also have people who need to hold out those positions, right? Because that's their role, and they do play an important role, because then they push everyone, nudge people towards a bit more of the center, and find an agreement. That's what I think when I'm trying to be optimistic. I do think though that there's, you know, so my worry is that last year we had this whole, you know, momentum around Food System Summit, and even though it was controversial and there were a lot of debates around it, it did put the whole issues around food systems at a higher consciousness. My concern is now that is disappearing, because everybody's now just focusing on food shortages and responding to it. So, you know, on a much more short term, and I think we really need to start thinking about, hang on a minute, you know, this is the third major food crisis we've had in 15 years. If we actually do not tackle the issues systematically, like what Leonard was saying just now, we're going to have another one pretty soon. So I don't know if I answer your question, but that's my opinion.
Thank you so much, Thin. We have one more question from Ravi. So Ravi, if you would like to open your micro or comment.
Thank you, Thin. I mean, really thought-provoking talk today. My question is related to the scenario that we are dealing in. I work for diversification of cereal systems mainly. On one hand, we have issues related to, you know, the nutritional security, food security. On the other hand, we are talking of the climate change, you know, natural resources, sustainability, gender inclusion, and, you know, those kind of issues. So what should be the priority as of today, depending on your point of view? Thank you.
Sorry, Ravi, could you repeat that again? So you're working on diversification, but the priority in terms of how to diversify, what to diversify, or?
Well, I mean, related to the agri-food system per se, I mean, when we are addressing the challenges of food security and or nutritional security, as a few mentioned, you know, right away, what should be our priority, whether we should focus more on nutrition and food security, or we should focus more on things like gender inclusion and sustainability and climate adaptation and mitigation, or what should be the, you know, the priority?
That's Ravi, you just asked me the $1 million question. And my answer is not going to satisfy. I think it will
because
be
there are
case. Yeah, I think in some ways it will have to be case specific and context specific, but also it is so hard to say one is more important than the other, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, fully agree.
Yeah, and you know, because I think one of the reasons why we're having this issue around micronutrient deficiency was that there was too much focus at the beginning about productivity and yield and you know, government policies were focusing on that, right? So we now need to rebalance that a bit, because we realize that has sort of and I'm not just saying that yield and calorie and were the only reason why there is micronutrient deficiency. There's a lot of, you know, highly ultra processed foods that are also contributing to it. But the sum total of all of that is that now we have these massive ballooning health costs, right? But I think some of those issues are also related and maybe should be tackled in a way that is more holistic, because I think things like gender inclusion, I think, to me at least, goes hand in hand with things like nutrition and both, food security. That includes nutrition security, right? So in places where perhaps gender inclusion is not, it's very low, then I think you will definitely see that there will be high cases of anemia. Probably there'll be high cases of huge malnutrition and also food insecurity. So, and the issue is I guess not which should we prioritize, but I guess how can we find a model that can absorb all of these issues and do something that can tackle, at least many of them at once, instead of doing it on a piecemeal or siloed approach, right? Because climate adaptation, if you don't adapt, you're going to have massive problems in terms of yield in the future, and also in terms of the nutrients. So that's going to have, again, impact on food security and malnutrition. And we know that, when people are struggling for food, perhaps that's when issues around violence within the households, gender inclusion goes back down, right? So they're all interconnected, which in a way makes it harder, but hopefully also it means that if we find a good model, tackling one can also have benefits, co-benefits. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Thien. And now I would like to invite Dr. Brankovic for some final words. This is a very great presentation. Thank you, Lynn. Yes, please, Dr. Bram.
Just a few words of thanks. Thanks for taking the time to come with us and speak to us. I think it is very, very new to have an award-winning multimedia journalist speaking to us about food and climate issues. And I think it challenges as well on the content, but also on the way we make content available that we think we have, and it can be used for you to do your job better. So this is part of the Excellence in Science strategy process. So I hope this got us our brain a bit kicked into some thinking mode, so that we can use the input for our Excellence in Science strategy process. But as you know, the board endorsed CIMMYT strategy process under the 1CGIAR research and innovation strategy. We need to carve out how we are going to participate in that strategy. And it has 6 sub-strategies. And one of the other sub-strategies is communication, and the other one is advocacy. And I think you also gave us quite some elements to say, well, if we think we should get those messages out, then we should get those messages out and probably find the right way to work better with you as a professional, so you can do the fantastic job you already do even better. Thanks once again for taking the time to talk to us. We know we have a very busy agenda, and we much appreciate your gift of your shared knowledge. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you for allowing me to be quite provocative and have this discussion. Really appreciate that.
We loved it. Thanks a lot. Have a happy day. Good afternoon. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.